The park was quiet that evening, bathed in the golden hues of the setting sun. Birds chirped softly, and the faint laughter of children playing in the distance danced through the air. On one of the worn wooden benches sat a boy named Liam, no older than 12, his tousled brown hair falling into his eyes as he absent-mindedly flipped through the pages of an old comic book. Liam loved the park. It was his little escape from the noisy group home where he lived, a place where he could dream of adventures and superheroes without anyone interrupting him. But today, something was different. Across from where he sat, an elderly man occupied a bench, hunched over with his face buried in his hands. His shoulders trembled ever so slightly, and even from where Liam was sitting, he could sense the sorrow that seemed to radiate from the man. Liam noticed that the man, dressed in a simple coat and a hat that looked a bit too big for his head, seemed out of place. Most people at the park came with families, friends, or pets. This man was utterly alone, and the sight tugged at something deep inside Liam. For a while, Liam debated with himself. He wasn't the type to just walk up to strangers, especially adults, but something about the old man's loneliness mirrored his own. Taking a deep breath, Liam set his comic book aside, stood up, and slowly approached the man. As he got closer, he could hear the faint sound of muffled sobs. The old man didn't even notice Liam was there until the boy softly said, "Excuse me, sir, are you okay?" The man looked up, startled, his tear-streaked face revealing eyes that were bloodshot yet kind. For a moment, he didn't say anything, as though trying to decide whether to wave the boy away or answer him. Finally, he wiped his face with a trembling hand and gave a weak smile. "Oh, it's nothing, son. Just old memories." Liam nodded, not pushing further. "Mind if I sit with you?" The man hesitated, then gestured to the empty spot beside him. "Suit yourself." The two sat in silence for a while, neither knowing quite what to say. Liam swung his legs back and forth, occasionally glancing at the man, while the old man stared ahead at nothing in particular. Finally, Liam spoke again. "Sometimes, talking helps. That's what my counselor always says, anyway." The man chuckled dryly, though there was no humor in it. "Smart counselor. But some things are better left in the past." Liam shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it's better to let someone else carry a little of it with you." The simplicity of the boy's words caught the man off guard. He looked at Liam closely for the first time. There was something about the boy, an openness, a sincerity, that made it hard to brush him off. "You're wise for your age," the man said finally. "What's your name?" "Liam." "What's yours?" "Walter," the man replied, his voice soft. "Walter Hayes." "Well, Walter," Liam said, leaning back against the bench, "I'm not in any rush to get home. So, if you want some company, I'm here." Walter didn't respond immediately, but the corners of his mouth turned upward ever so slightly. "All right, Liam. Company sounds nice." As the evening wore on, the two shared bits and pieces of their lives. Liam talked about the group home, how he missed having a family, and how the park was his favorite place in the world. Walter, in turn, shared vague hints about his own loneliness, carefully avoiding too much detail but revealing just enough for Liam to understand he had lost something, or someone, very dear to him. By the time the sky turned dark, Liam felt a strange connection to the old man. It wasn't pity, exactly, but something deeper, a sense that they were both filling a quiet void in each other's lives. "Well," Liam said, standing up and stretching, "I should probably get back before the group home locks the doors. But I'll be here tomorrow if you want to talk again." Walter nodded, watching as Liam walked away. "Good night, Liam," he called out, his voice steadier now than it had been all day. "Good night, Walter," the boy replied with a smile. Neither of them knew it then, but that simple encounter would be the start of something extraordinary. Over the coming months, their bond would deepen in ways neither could have imagined. But for now, as Walter sat alone on the bench once more, a tiny flicker of hope began to stir within him, a hope he hadn't felt in years. The following day, Liam found himself hurrying back to the park after school, his steps quicker than usual. He wasn't sure why he was so eager to see Walter again. Maybe it was because the old man had seemed so lost, so unlike anyone Liam had ever met. Or maybe it was because, for once, Liam felt like he wasn't the one who needed help. Whatever the reason, he clutched his comic book tightly as he approached the same bench where they'd met. Walter was already there, sitting in the same spot, staring at the horizon as though searching for something he'd never find. His expression was distant, but his face softened when he noticed Liam approaching. "Back again, huh?" Walter said with a faint smile. "Yeah," Liam replied, plopping down beside him without hesitation. "I told you I'd come back. Did you think I was lying?" Walter chuckled. "No, I didn't think that. Just wasn't sure if you'd want to waste your time on an old man like me." "Not wasting my time," Liam said simply. "Besides, you don't seem that old." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Flattery will get you nowhere, kid. I'm 72. 72? That's not too bad. You've probably got some cool stories from when you were young." Walter tilted his head, considering. "I suppose I do. But most of them are probably boring to a kid like you." "Try me," Liam said, leaning forward with curiosity. Walter hesitated for a moment before starting to talk about his childhood. He spoke of growing up in a small town, of summers spent fishing at the creek and winters building snow forts with his brothers. As he spoke, his voice grew lighter, as though he were momentarily transported back to those simpler times. Liam listened intently, asking questions and laughing at Walter's occasional jokes. In return, Liam shared his own stories, though his were far less cheerful. He talked about his earliest memories of his parents before they passed away in a car accident. He described the countless foster homes he'd been shuffled through, each one leaving him feeling more like a number than a person. Walter listened quietly, his expression growing somber. "That's a lot for someone your age to go through," Walter said after a while. "I'm sorry, Liam." "It's not your fault," Liam replied with a shrug. "It's just how things are." Walter stared at the boy for a long moment, his thoughts racing. There was something about Liam's resilience that struck him deeply. He saw a reflection of his younger self in the boy, a spirit that refused to be broken, no matter how many times life tried. Days turned into weeks, and their routine became almost sacred. Every afternoon, Liam would race to the park, and Walter would always be there, waiting on the same bench. They talked about everything and nothing, memories, dreams, fears, and the little things that made life bearable. They became each other's lifeline in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. One particularly chilly afternoon, Liam arrived at the park shivering, his jacket too thin to keep out the biting wind. Walter noticed immediately and frowned. "Don't you have anything warmer to wear?" he asked. "Not really," Liam admitted, rubbing his arms. "The group home gives us basics, but nothing fancy." Walter didn't say anything, but the next day, he arrived with a thick, old coat draped over his arm. "Here," he said, holding it out to Liam. "It's not new, but it'll keep you warm." Liam's eyes widened. "Really? Are you sure?" "Of course," Walter said firmly. "Can't have you freezing out here." Touched, Liam slipped on the coat, which was slightly too big but wonderfully warm. "Thanks, Walter," he said, beaming. "This is the nicest thing anyone's ever done for me." Walter smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "It's the least I could do, kid." As winter deepened, their friendship only grew stronger. Walter began to notice how much he looked forward to seeing Liam each day. The boy's energy and optimism had a way of brightening even the darkest corners of his mind. Liam, in turn, found comfort in Walter's steady presence. For the first time in years, he felt like someone genuinely cared about him. But as the months passed, Walter's health began to show signs of decline. He tried to hide it from Liam, brushing off his persistent coughs and occasional fatigue as nothing serious. Liam wasn't convinced, but he didn't press the issue, afraid of upsetting his friend. Then one day, Walter didn't show up at the park. Liam waited for hours, his heart sinking as the sun dipped below the horizon. He told himself that Walter was probably just running late or had a good reason for not coming. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, and the one after that, Walter's bench remained empty. Desperate for answers, Liam decided to do something he'd never done before. He asked around the park, describing Walter to anyone who would listen. Finally, A kind woman who worked at the nearby coffee shop recognized his description. "You're talking about Mr. Hayes, right?" she said. "He hasn't been around for a few days. I think he lives over on Maple Street, in that little gray house on the corner." Armed with this information, Liam made a decision. He was going to find Walter and make sure he was okay. Liam couldn't shake the uneasy feeling as he walked toward Maple Street. It wasn't like Walter to just disappear without a word. Over the weeks they'd spent together, Walter had become a constant in Liam's life, someone dependable, someone who always kept his promises. The thought of him being sick or hurt made Liam's chest tighten. He walked faster, the weight of the thick coat Walter had given him making him feel both comforted and guilty. What if something had happened and he hadn't noticed the signs? When Liam turned the corner onto Maple Street, he quickly spotted the gray house the woman had mentioned. It was small and unassuming, with peeling paint on the shutters and a garden overgrown with weeds. It wasn't what Liam had pictured. Somehow, he imagined Walter living in a cozy place with flowers in the yard and a dog by his side. Instead, the house looked lonely, just like Walter. Liam hesitated at the gate, his nerves getting the better of him. What if Walter didn't want him to visit? What if he wasn't even home? The idea of knocking on a stranger's door, especially an adult, felt daunting. But then he thought about the way Walter had always made time for him, even on days when he seemed tired or distracted. Taking a deep breath, Liam pushed open the creaky gate and walked up to the front door. He knocked lightly at first, then louder when there was no response. "Walter?" "It's me, Liam," he called out, hoping his voice carried through the door. There was no answer, only the faint sound of a television playing somewhere inside. Liam's heart sank. He tried the doorbell, but it didn't seem to work. After a moment of deliberation, he walked around the side of the house, peeking through the windows for any sign of Walter. Through one of the windows, he caught a glimpse of the living room. It was modest, with a worn armchair and a coffee table cluttered with books and newspapers. But what caught Liam's attention was a pair of shoes sitting neatly by the door, shoes he recognized as Walter's. He was home. Liam knocked on the window, louder this time. "Walter! Are you in there?" His voice was edged with worry. A long moment passed before the curtains twitched, and Walter's face appeared. He looked pale and frail, his eyes weary and sunken. When he saw Liam, a flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by something that looked like guilt. He disappeared from the window, and a few seconds later, the door creaked open. "Liam," Walter said, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you," Liam said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "You didn't show up at the park, and I got worried. Are you okay?" Walter sighed and leaned against the doorframe, as though standing was an effort. "I'm fine, kid. Just under the weather." "You don't look fine," Liam said bluntly. "You look sick. Have you been to a doctor?" Walter shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth despite his exhaustion. "You sound like an old friend of mine. Always telling me what I should do." "That's because you should," Liam said, crossing his arms. "Can I come in?" For a moment, Walter hesitated. Then he stepped aside, opening the door wider. "All right. But just for a little while." Liam stepped inside and immediately noticed how cold it was. The heater wasn't on, and the air felt damp and stale. Walter shuffled to the armchair and sank into it with a sigh, gesturing for Liam to take the small wooden stool by the coffee table. Liam sat down, his eyes scanning the room. It was cozy in its own way, but it had an air of neglect. Dust lined the shelves, and a stack of unopened mail sat on a side table. "Why didn't you tell me you were sick?" Liam asked softly, his tone more concerned than accusatory. Walter leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. "Didn't want to worry you. It's nothing serious. Just a little bug, that's all." "Doesn't seem like nothing," Liam said. "Do you need anything? Food? Medicine?" Walter opened his eyes and gave Liam a tired smile. "You're a good kid, you know that?" Liam shrugged, looking down at his hands. "You've done a lot for me, Walter. It's only fair I do something for you." For a while, they sat in silence. Walter seemed lost in thought, while Liam struggled with the mix of emotions churning inside him. He wanted to believe Walter would be fine, but the older man's frailty was hard to ignore. Finally, Walter broke the silence. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "Who?" Liam asked, leaning forward. Walter's gaze drifted to the fireplace, where a small, faded photograph sat on the mantel. In it, a younger Walter stood beside a woman and a little boy, all of them smiling brightly. Liam got up and walked over to look at the photo more closely. The boy in the picture couldn't have been older than 7, and his mischievous grin reminded Liam of his own when he was younger. "Is that your family?" Liam asked. Walter nodded, his expression clouding with sorrow. "My wife, Margaret, and my son, David. They were my whole world." "What happened to them?" Liam asked hesitantly, not wanting to pry but unable to stop himself. Walter's voice cracked as he spoke. "Margaret passed away when David was just a boy. Cancer. It was sudden. After that, it was just me and David. We were close, but I wasn't always the father I should have been." Liam's chest tightened as he listened. "What do you mean?" Walter took a deep, shuddering breath. "I worked too much. I wasn't there for him when he needed me most. And by the time I realized how much he was hurting, it was too late. We drifted apart." "Do you still talk to him?" Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Walter shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He moved away years ago. We haven't spoken since. Not for lack of trying, though. I've written him letters, left messages, but he never answers." Liam felt a lump rise in his throat. He couldn't imagine the pain of losing not just one, but 2 people you loved. "I'm sorry, Walter," he said earnestly. Walter smiled weakly. "Don't be. It's my own fault. I made mistakes, and I've had to live with them." Liam wanted to say something, anything, that might ease Walter's pain, but no words felt adequate. Instead, he reached out and placed a hand on Walter's arm. "You're not alone, Walter. You've got me." Walter looked at Liam, his eyes softening. "You're a good kid, Liam. Better than I deserve." The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Liam realized then that Walter's pain ran deeper than he'd ever guessed, and it made him more determined than ever to be there for his friend. As the afternoon light faded, Liam stood up and began tidying the living room without asking for permission. He picked up the unopened mail, dusted the shelves, and even fetched a glass of water for Walter. At first, Walter protested, but eventually, he relented, watching the boy with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "You don't have to do all this," Walter said. "I know," Liam replied, smiling. "But I want to." By the time Liam left that evening, the house felt a little warmer, both in temperature and spirit. Walter sat in his armchair, the faintest glimmer of hope returning to his tired eyes. And as Liam walked home, he felt a newfound sense of purpose. Walter had given him so much more than a coat and a few afternoons of company. He'd given him a sense of belonging, a reminder that even in a world full of loss and hardship, connections could be made and lives could be changed. But as much as Liam tried to hold on to that hope, a nagging fear lingered in the back of his mind. Walter's health was worse than he let on, and Liam couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out to make things right. The days that followed became a blur for Liam. He visited Walter every chance he could, trying to keep the old man company as much as possible. Each time he arrived, he found Walter sitting in his armchair, wrapped in blankets, his once vibrant eyes dimmed by exhaustion. But Walter never complained. He seemed content to simply have Liam there, and that was enough for him. Liam, however, couldn't stop worrying. Every visit, he noticed more signs of Walter's decline. His cough had worsened, and his movements were slower, more labored. The house, which had once felt warm in its modesty, now seemed cold and quiet, like a place waiting for something. But Liam refused to give up. He couldn't. Not after all the old man had done for him. One evening, as the sun set behind the gray house, Liam arrived to find Walter unusually quiet. He was sitting in his armchair, staring out the window, his hands clasped together tightly. His breathing was shallow, and he seemed lost in thought. "Walter?" Liam said softly, stepping inside. "You okay?" Walter didn't turn to look at him right away. Instead, he sighed deeply, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years of regret. Finally, he turned to face Liam, his eyes clouded with a mixture of sadness and something else, something that made Liam's heart skip a beat. "Liam, there's something I need to tell you." Liam sat down beside him, his usual smile replaced by a look of concern. "What is it?" "You're scaring me, Walter." The old man chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. "You've been a good friend to me, Liam. A better friend than I deserve. I'm grateful for that, more than you know." "Of course I'm your friend, Walter," Liam said, feeling his stomach twist. "You don't have to thank me." Walter looked away again, his gaze distant. "It's just... I'm afraid I don't have much time left." Liam's heart sank. "What do you mean? You're just sick, right? You'll get better. You're strong, Walter." Walter shook his head slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "I've known for a while, Liam. The doctors, they don't have much hope for me. It's not just the cough, it's my heart. It's been weakening for months, and no one can do anything about it." Liam swallowed hard, his hands trembling. But you can't just give up." "You can't, I'm not giving up," Walter interrupted, his voice stronger now. "But I don't have much time left to make things right. I need to ask you something, Liam." Liam nodded, trying to steady his breath. "Anything." Walter's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, Liam saw a deep, painful vulnerability there. "I'm not asking you for sympathy, or for help. But I need to know that someone will remember me when I'm gone. That I haven't been completely forgotten. You see, I spent too many years alone, and I don't want to end up like that. Forgotten and alone." Liam felt his throat tighten, and he struggled to find the right words. "You won't be forgotten, Walter. I'll never forget you. I promise." Walter gave him a weak smile, but there was a sadness in it. "Thank you, Liam. You don't know how much that means to me." Liam wanted to say more, to promise Walter everything he needed to hear, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he reached over and gently squeezed Walter's hand. It was cold and fragile, like the rest of him. "I'll be here for you, Walter. I'll make sure you're not alone." For the rest of the evening, the two of them sat together in silence. The weight of their unspoken words hung between them, heavy and suffocating. As the clock ticked on, Liam couldn't help but feel that something was slipping away, something precious that he couldn't hold on to. Over the next few days, Liam continued his visits, though they became harder as Walter's condition worsened. The old man's breathing grew more labored, and his once bright spirit seemed to fade with each passing hour. Despite his best efforts, Liam couldn't deny the truth that was staring him in the face: Walter wasn't getting better. And no matter how hard he tried to keep up the pretense of normalcy, the reality was sinking in. One afternoon, as Liam walked into Walter's house, he found the old man lying on the couch instead of his armchair. His eyes were closed, and his face was pale, his skin stretched too tight over his bones. For a moment, Liam panicked, his heart racing in his chest. "Walter," he called, stepping forward. "Walter, are you okay?" Walter stirred slightly, opening his eyes just enough to look at Liam. "I'm still here, kid," he said, his voice raspy. "Just resting." Liam sank into the chair beside him, his mind racing. "You don't look okay," he said, his voice trembling. "You need to go to the hospital, Walter. Please." Walter chuckled weakly. "I'm beyond that, Liam. The hospital can't fix what's already broken." Liam didn't know what to say. He just sat there, watching Walter struggle to breathe, his chest rising and falling with great effort. It hurt to see him like this, to see someone who had been so strong and full of life now fading away in front of him. "Walter," Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. Walter turned his head toward him, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. "Liam, I don't want to die alone. Not like this. I don't want my last days to be spent in this cold house, with no one around. I'm asking you, Liam, for one last thing. Liam's heart pounded in his chest as he leaned forward. "Anything, Walter. What do you need?" Walter's voice was barely more than a whisper, but his words hit Liam like a punch to the gut. "Adopt me, Liam. Let me be your family. I know I'm not your real grandfather, but I can't stand the thought of dying alone, without anyone to remember me. Please." Liam felt the tears well up in his eyes as the weight of Walter's request settled on him. "Of course," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll never let you be alone, Walter. I promise. You're my family now." For the first time in what felt like forever, Walter smiled, a real smile, full of warmth and relief. "Thank you, Liam. You've made this old man's last days the happiest of his life." Liam didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he knew one thing for certain. He would be there for Walter, just as Walter had been there for him. They had both lost so much in life, but in each other, they had found something precious, something worth holding on to. But as the days passed and Walter's condition worsened, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more he needed to do. Something important that he hadn't yet figured out. He didn't know what it was, but deep down, he felt the weight of it pressing down on him, like an unfinished chapter in a story he hadn't yet read. The days after Walter's request passed in a blur. Liam did everything he could to be there for him, but the reality of the situation was growing more difficult to ignore. Walter's health was deteriorating rapidly. The old man who had once been full of stories, laughter, and wisdom now struggled to sit up, let alone talk for long stretches. His once strong voice had become a raspy whisper, and his movements were slow, uncoordinated. Liam tried not to let it show, but he couldn't help the gnawing fear that clung to him every time he walked into Walter's house. Each visit felt like it could be his last with the man who had become a surrogate grandfather. Despite his best efforts, Liam couldn't hide the strain from his face, especially when he saw how tired Walter was, how quickly the spark in his eyes seemed to flicker and fade. One night, as Liam sat beside him in the dim light of the living room, Walter turned toward him with a look of deep sadness in his eyes. "You've been good to me, Liam. I don't know how to thank you for all you've done." Liam shook his head, squeezing Walter's hand gently. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just doing what anyone would do for someone they care about." Walter smiled faintly, but there was a sadness behind it that made Liam's heart ache. "I know you care, kid. You've shown me that. But I can't help but wonder if I've kept you from something important. Something you should be doing with your life. I'm just holding you back." Liam frowned, not understanding what Walter meant. "What are you talking about? You're not holding me back. I want to be here for you. That's all that matters." Walter's eyes softened, his gaze growing distant. "When I was young, I spent so much of my life focused on work and success, on building things that didn't really matter in the end. I pushed away the people who mattered most. I never gave my son the attention he deserved. And now it's too late." Liam shifted uncomfortably, feeling like he was intruding on something too personal. But he couldn't ignore the weight of Walter's words. "You can't change the past, Walter. You can only do your best with what you have right now." "I know," Walter said quietly. "But it doesn't make it any easier to live with the regret. And I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. I don't want you to wake up one day and realize you've missed out on something that really matters." The old man's words lingered in the air, and for a moment, Liam didn't know how to respond. What was Walter really asking of him? Was he suggesting that Liam walk away from his promise, that he focus on his own life and leave Walter to face his final days alone? But then Walter's grip on Liam's hand tightened slightly, his eyes pleading. "I'm not saying you should leave me, Liam. I just want you to make sure that, when I'm gone, you don't feel trapped by the decisions you've made for me. You have your own life ahead of you, kid. Don't let me be the one who holds you back from it." Liam swallowed hard, his emotions running high. He wanted to tell Walter that he wasn't a burden, that he would never leave him. But the truth was that Walter's words had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. What did it mean to truly be there for someone, to honor a promise made when the future seemed so uncertain? Could he give Walter everything he needed and still keep his own life on track? The thought was overwhelming, and for the first time, Liam found himself questioning the direction his life was heading. It wasn't just about Walter anymore. It was about what he wanted for himself. The choices he made now would shape the rest of his life, and it was hard to ignore the tension growing inside him as he stood at the crossroads of duty and desire. Meanwhile, as Liam grappled with his thoughts, a new complication began to unfold. He started receiving calls from his mother, who lived in the city, asking when he planned to return home. "Liam, it's been a while," she said one evening, her voice filled with concern. "You've barely been around. You know you're always welcome here, right?" Liam had been avoiding her calls for weeks. He didn't want to explain why he'd been staying away, why he felt like he couldn't just leave Walter. But as the days wore on, the pressure from his mother grew. She kept asking when he would return, when he'd come back to the life she'd always imagined for him. Her words, though spoken with love, felt suffocating to Liam. She wanted him to follow the path she had laid out for him, to go to college, find a career, live a normal life. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. Walter had become his world, his reason for waking up every day. Yet even that connection wasn't without its challenges. As Walter grew weaker, there were times when the old man seemed to push Liam away, not out of anger, but out of some deep-seated fear of becoming a burden. There were moments when Walter would insist on being alone, pushing Liam to leave, even when the boy didn't want to go. It was as if Walter couldn't bear the thought of being a source of pain or inconvenience for anyone, even Liam, who had become his closest friend. One night, as Liam sat by Walter's bedside, he finally spoke the words that had been lingering on his heart. "Walter, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I'm failing you somehow." Walter opened his eyes, the faintest smile crossing his lips. "You're not failing me, Liam. You've been the best thing that's happened to me in years. You've given me something I thought I'd lost, hope. You've made these last months of my life something I can hold on to. But I don't know how to do this," Liam whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to balance being here for you and living my own life. I don't know what comes next. What if I mess everything up?" Walter's hand reached out, shaking slightly, but he clasped Liam's firmly. "You won't mess it up, kid. Life isn't about having all the answers. It's about making the best choices you can, even when you don't know what's coming next." Liam nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the uncertainty hanging over them. He couldn't predict what would happen next, couldn't predict how long Walter had left. All he knew was that time was slipping away, and he wasn't sure he could keep up. And then there was the call from the lawyer, which Liam had been dreading. The man had been trying to reach Walter for days, and when Walter had finally agreed to take the call, the news that followed was both unexpected and frightening. Walter had a will. A complicated one. One that, it turned out, had been written years ago, long before Walter had become close to Liam. And in that will, there were things that Liam didn't understand, things that might change everything. Walter hadn't been ready to share the details yet, but the anxiety on his face was impossible to ignore. The lawyer's words had shaken him, and Liam couldn't help but wonder what secrets Walter had been hiding all this time. What had been left unsaid? And how would it all affect Liam? The tension between what was expected of him and what he wanted to do only grew with each passing day. As the days grew shorter, Liam felt the pull of two worlds, one tied to his past, one to his future, tugging him in different directions. The following days felt like an endless cycle of uncertainty and dread. Liam tried to push past the overwhelming feelings of fear and confusion that crept in with every thought of the future. He focused on Walter, on staying by his side as much as possible, but there was no escaping the growing weight of the situation. The more time passed, the more Liam felt trapped in the tension between his obligations to Walter and his own life outside the old man's house. His mother's calls became more frequent, each one a reminder of the life waiting for him outside of this small, crumbling home. She continued to ask when he would come back, when he would return to his studies, when he would start building a life for himself. But what did it mean to build a life anymore? Liam had never been sure about what he wanted for himself, but over the past few months, he had found meaning in something he didn't expect, being there for someone who needed him. Walter had become more than just a friend or a surrogate grandfather, he had become a lifeline. In the face of all that was slipping away from them both, their bond felt like the only thing that was real. Despite this, Liam couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that he was neglecting something crucial. The lawyer's call weighed heavily on his mind, the words left unsaid, the mystery of Walter's will swirling around him like an ominous cloud. What was Walter hiding? And why had he been so insistent on not sharing it with Liam until now? One evening, after another round of difficult discussions with his mother, Liam decided he couldn't ignore the questions any longer. He had to confront Walter about the will. He had to understand what was at stake. As much as he feared that it would change everything, he knew there could be no peace until he did. He arrived at Walter's house just as the sun was setting, its pale light casting long shadows over the front yard. When he stepped inside, he was met with the familiar silence, but this time it felt different, heavy, filled with something he couldn't quite name. Walter was sitting in his favorite armchair by the window, staring out into the dimming world outside. "Walter?" Liam called softly, stepping into the room. Walter turned his head slowly, a tired smile crossing his lips. "Hey, kid. I didn't expect you tonight." Liam nodded but didn't return the smile. He sat down across from Walter, the words weighing on him like a stone in his chest. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Walter's eyes shifted, and for a moment, Liam saw something flicker there, something that looked like fear. It was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, but it didn't escape Liam's notice. Walter cleared his throat. "What is it, Liam?" The lawyer called, Liam began, his heart pounding. "He said something about a will, about things I don't understand." "What's going on, Walter?" Walter's expression hardened slightly, and Liam could see the guard go up. He didn't speak immediately, just looked out the window again, his gaze distant. After what felt like an eternity, he sighed deeply, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to burden you with this, Liam. I never thought you'd need to know." "Burden me?" Liam asked, confusion creeping into his tone. "Walter, you're not a burden. But I need to understand. You've already given me so much, and I don't want there to be any more secrets between us." Walter's eyes flicked to Liam, searching his face as if weighing something in his mind. Then, slowly, he nodded. "There's a reason I don't have any family left, Liam. My son, your father, he and I didn't get along. We never saw eye to eye on anything. I've made some mistakes in my life, things I'm not proud of. But there's one thing I did right." Liam's heart skipped a beat as Walter's words sank in. "Asterisk his son?" "My father, asterisk." For a moment, everything froze in Liam's mind. He stared at Walter, unable to speak, unsure of what to make of the revelation. He had never known his father. He didn't even know if he wanted to know about him, but hearing Walter's admission sent a chill through him. Walter seemed to sense Liam's shock, and he reached out a shaky hand to steady himself. "I wasn't the best father, Liam. I failed him. He was young, full of dreams, and I couldn't give him what he needed. And after everything, we lost touch. He went off to start his own life, and I didn't hear from him again until a few months ago." Liam's mind raced as the pieces started to fall into place. "A few months ago? What do you mean?" Walter lowered his gaze, his voice trembling now. "I received a letter. From your father. He'd been trying to find me for years, Liam. He had questions. He wanted answers. But by the time I got the letter, it was too late." Liam's breath caught in his throat. "Too late for what?" Walter closed his eyes, the lines of regret deepening on his face. "He was already gone. Your father passed away. I didn't know until it was too late to make things right." The weight of Walter's words pressed heavily on Liam's chest. Asterisk his father? Dead, asterisk he'd never known. He hadn't even known who his father was. And now, hearing that he was gone, it felt like a cruel twist of fate. "I didn't know, Liam," Walter whispered, his voice breaking. "I never told you the truth because I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to bring that pain into your life, the same way I brought it into my son's. But I made a promise to him, to your father, that I would look out for you. That if something happened to him, I would make sure you weren't left alone. And now, here you are." Liam couldn't breathe. His heart was racing, and his thoughts were spinning. He had been so focused on Walter, on helping him, that he never once considered his own father, his own family. But the truth was right in front of him now. The man who had raised him, who had shown him what it meant to care, was tied to his own father in ways Liam never could have imagined. "I don't know what to do with this, Walter," Liam finally managed to say, his voice small. "This changes everything." Walter nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know. But you're not alone, Liam. You have me, and you have a future. You just have to decide what you want that future to look like." Liam stood up, pacing the room, trying to process the flood of emotions that overwhelmed him. The mysteries of the past, of his family, and the future he was trying to build with Walter, none of it made sense anymore. Everything was shifting, and he didn't know where to turn. Just as the silence settled in, Walter spoke again, his voice low but filled with conviction. "I've already made arrangements in my will, Liam. You'll be taken care of. The house, the property, everything. But it's not just about money, kid. It's about making sure you're not alone. That you have a place to go. A family to call your own." Liam stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. "What do you mean? What's in the will?" Walter didn't answer immediately, his gaze drifting back to the window. "You'll know when the time comes, Liam. But it's important. Whatever happens, I need you to promise me something." Liam felt the weight of the moment bearing down on him. "What?" "Promise me you won't let the past hold you back. Promise me you'll make your own choices. Find your own path. You have the power to do that, Liam. Don't let my mistakes be the things that define you." The silence stretched between them, and in that moment, Liam realized just how much he had been relying on Walter, on the idea that the old man was the only constant in his life. But the truth was, it was up to him now. He had to make his own decisions, find his own way, even if that meant facing the unknown head-on. And whatever was in that will, whatever secrets it held, would change everything. Liam couldn't sleep that night. His mind kept racing, the weight of Walter's words pressing down on him with every passing minute. His father, he had never even known the man, and now the revelation that his father was gone was like a ghost haunting his thoughts. It wasn't just the loss of a parent, it was the loss of an entire life he hadn't even had the chance to understand. What kind of person had his father been? What kind of legacy had he left behind? Walter's promise to look out for him suddenly felt like a chain around his neck, pulling him in all directions. The future that had seemed so clear just days ago now felt like a fog, and Liam wasn't sure how to navigate it. By morning, Walter's condition had worsened. Liam had been by his side for hours, watching as the old man slept fitfully, his breathing shallow and uneven. There were moments when Walter's hand would twitch or his lips would move as if he were trying to say something, but nothing would come out. It was the kind of silence that was deafening. The kind of silence that told Liam everything was slipping away. And still, the promise Walter had made to his father, the words of the will, none of it made sense. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something big and irreversible. Liam had decided he couldn't wait any longer. He needed answers. Walter had kept so many things from him, kept so much of his past buried, and yet Liam couldn't help but feel that it was all leading to something monumental. Something that would force him to confront everything about his life, about who he was, and what kind of future he could have. He picked up the phone and dialed the lawyer's number. His fingers trembled as he waited for the line to connect. The call was answered after the third ring. "Mr. Rayner," the lawyer's voice was calm, too calm, in Liam's ears. "I've been expecting you." Liam's stomach clenched. "I need to know what's in the will. I need to know what's going to happen." The lawyer hesitated. "I understand, Liam. But there are certain procedures that need to be followed before I can disclose anything. The will, as you know, has been executed." But what?" Liam pressed, his impatience growing. "What's the delay?" "Mr. Walters made some unusual requests in the will," the lawyer continued, his voice lowering. "I'm afraid you won't be able to access everything until we meet in person." Liam could feel his pulse quicken. "Where? When? I need to know now." "I will be at Walter's home in a few hours to go over the details with you," the lawyer finally said. "It's a complicated matter, and I must make sure you understand everything before moving forward." Liam hung up the phone, his mind swirling with confusion and dread. The tension in the air had thickened since Walter's last words, and the thought of confronting whatever secrets were hidden in that will made his stomach turn. There was so much he didn't know, so much that Walter had never shared, and every moment that passed felt like the clock was ticking towards some inevitable, life-altering decision. As the day wore on, Walter's condition continued to worsen. His breathing grew more erratic, and there were times when his eyes would flutter open, but he seemed too weak to speak. Liam kept close, as he had promised, but even his presence seemed to barely register with the old man. It was as though Walter was slipping between two worlds, and Liam was powerless to stop it. It wasn't until late afternoon when the lawyer arrived. He walked into the house with a briefcase, a somber look on his face, his steps heavy as he crossed the threshold. He gave Liam a polite nod, but his eyes lingered on the frail figure of Walter, who was now barely conscious. "Mr. Rayner," the lawyer said, settling into the chair across from Liam. "I'm afraid we don't have much time. Walter's wishes are clear, but the circumstances surrounding them are complicated." Liam's chest tightened. He couldn't even bring himself to look at Walter at that moment. "What's in the will?" he asked, his voice strained. "What do I need to know?" The lawyer placed the briefcase on the table and opened it carefully. Inside, there were several documents, neatly stacked. He pulled one out, unfolded it, and began to read aloud. "In the event of my passing, I wish to bequeath all my property, my assets, and my remaining finances to my son's child, Liam. However, there are conditions attached to this inheritance." Liam's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected those words to hit him so hard. His son's child, he wasn't even sure how to process it. His fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair as the lawyer continued. "The inheritance is contingent upon Liam's ability to meet specific requirements laid out by my son before his death. These include attending certain family obligations and fulfilling my son's last wishes." Liam's mind was spinning. Asterisk family obligations? Last wishes? What on earth was this all about? Asterisk the lawyer continued, not noticing the growing panic in Liam's eyes. "There are also instructions regarding Walter's estate, which has been divided into two separate trusts. The first trust is for Liam's future security, and the second trust contains details that must remain confidential until Liam turns 25. Liam felt his breath catch in his throat. "Confidential? What do you mean?" The lawyer sighed and looked at Liam sympathetically. "I'm afraid I can't divulge the specifics until the time comes. Walter's will is more than just a list of assets. It's a complicated arrangement, and some of the conditions can't be met unless you are able to complete certain tasks that Walter may have hinted at before his passing." Liam shook his head, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. Asterisk what tasks? What did Walter expect him to do? Asterisk the lawyer closed the briefcase and stood up, looking at Walter's sleeping form. "It's clear, Liam, that your life is about to change. But it's also clear that Walter wanted you to make your own choices, to learn from the mistakes of the past." Liam stood up abruptly, his heart pounding. "What mistakes? What's going on? What does all this mean?" The lawyer looked at him with an expression of deep concern. "It means, Liam, that Walter's legacy is yours to carry. But how you choose to handle it will determine everything. And there are things about your past, about your family, that you may not yet fully understand. Things that will change the course of your life in ways you never expected." Liam felt the weight of the words like a hammer on his chest. Everything, his future, his inheritance, his identity, was tied up in something he didn't even fully comprehend. And Walter, the man who had been his rock, his guide, was now slipping away, leaving behind a legacy filled with secrets and unanswered questions. The tension in the room was unbearable. As the lawyer made his way toward the door, he paused and turned to Liam. "You'll have to make a decision soon, Liam. And I can't promise it will be an easy one. But I can tell you this, once you open that final envelope, there's no going back." Liam nodded, his mind racing, his thoughts a tangled mess. As the lawyer left, the house felt even emptier, the silence almost suffocating. The envelope. Walter's final request. It was all leading to something that would change everything. But Liam didn't know if he was ready for it. The air in the house felt heavier after the lawyer left. Liam stood in the middle of the room, his mind buzzing with questions. Every part of him wanted to sit down and let the shock of the situation wash over him, but the weight of the envelope on the table kept pulling his focus. The lawyer had left with nothing more than a few cryptic words, leaving Liam with a knot in his stomach and the sense that he was standing at the precipice of something far larger than he could comprehend. Liam looked over at Walter. The old man was still unconscious, his shallow breaths the only sign of life in the otherwise still room. There was something eerily final about the way he lay there, like the moment of departure was closer than anyone cared to admit. Liam's thoughts churned. Everything he had ever known, everything he had believed about his family, about Walter, was unraveling at a dizzying pace. Walter's past was becoming entangled with Liam's present in ways that were impossible to ignore, and the truth felt out of reach. The will, the mysterious final instructions that would determine his future, loomed like a dark cloud. The lawyer's words echoed in Liam's mind, each one a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit together. Asterisk, what tasks? What family obligations? Asterisk, what had Walter's son left behind that would change everything for him? And why hadn't Walter told him more? Why keep the truth buried? Liam walked over to the table and picked up the envelope. It was thick, weighty, as though it held something far more important than just paper. His fingers hesitated for a moment before tearing it open, revealing a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting on the page was unmistakable, Walter's, though shaky, as though written in haste. It wasn't a letter, it was more like a set of instructions. Liam unfolded the paper slowly, his heart racing. The first line was clear and direct. Asterisk, Liam, if you are reading this, then I have passed, and it is time for you to understand what is coming. Your father and I made mistakes, but we both wanted the best for you. My death is not the end of your story, but a new beginning. The path forward will not be easy, but you are capable of walking it. The first step is to trust your heart and make a choice. Asterisk, Liam's throat tightened as he read the words. What did it mean? What choice? He scanned the page, his eyes darting across the text. The message became more cryptic with every line. Asterisk, in order to claim the inheritance you are due, there are 3 conditions. First, you must complete the task that I have set for you. Second, you must confront the truth about your family's past. And third, you must learn to forgive what has been done, and find a way to heal. Only then can you fully inherit what is rightfully yours. The house, the property, the wealth, it's all a part of something much larger than money. But you must prove you are ready to carry the burden. Asterisk, Liam felt the floor beneath him shift. What burden? What truth about his family? He turned the paper over, but there was nothing more written on it. Just those words. Prove you are ready to carry the burden. His mind was racing now, every question bubbling to the surface. What was Walter's son trying to tell him? What truth could there possibly be that would demand forgiveness? Was Walter's past filled with dark secrets? Liam had no answers, only more confusion. He couldn't keep staring at the paper forever. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things he couldn't understand. And Walter, he needed to be there, but it was becoming increasingly clear that the old man wasn't going to be around to help him sort this out. Whatever was coming next, Liam would have to face it alone. But the house was silent now. Walter wasn't waking up. The old man was drifting further away with each passing moment, his body becoming weaker, his presence slowly fading into the shadows of the room. Liam's heart sank. He couldn't bear to think of life without Walter. This man had been more of a father to him than anyone else ever had. And yet, as Liam held the instructions in his hands, he knew that Walter's death was just the beginning of a much larger journey, one that would take him into the heart of a mystery he wasn't prepared for. He glanced back at the table, the envelope still in front of him. The weight of the inheritance, of the tasks Walter had left behind, was more than just a challenge, it was a life-changing decision. And no matter how badly he wanted to escape it all, to walk away from the burden Walter had passed onto him, he knew deep down that he couldn't. Walter had entrusted him with this, and somehow, Liam felt a strange sense of duty to follow through. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking the passage of time as Liam stood frozen in thought. He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was clear, there was no turning back now. He had to face whatever was coming, whatever the task was, whatever truth needed confronting, and whatever burden lay ahead. His life, as he knew it, was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. And as he looked once more at the faintly flickering form of Walter in the armchair, Liam understood something fundamental. This journey would not just define his future, it would reveal who he truly was, who he could become. But the truth? That would take time. And it wasn't time he had much of. The door to the room creaked open just then, and Liam spun around, startled. It was his mother. She had arrived, her face pale, her expression full of worry. "Liam," she said, her voice trembling. "I got here as fast as I could. I didn't know if I should be here, but I couldn't leave you alone. How is he?" Liam swallowed, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. He could barely speak. Instead, he gestured toward Walter, the words caught in his throat. "I'm so sorry," his mother whispered, moving toward Walter's side. She bent down, taking the old man's hand in hers, her eyes softening as she stared at his frail form. Liam stepped back, feeling the tension in the room grow heavier with his mother's arrival. This was a moment he couldn't undo, a moment that was pushing him towards something he couldn't control. She didn't know what was happening, didn't understand the weight of the will, the tasks that had been left to him, the impossible choices that were now on his shoulders. But it was clear now. Walter's legacy was more than just the property. It was more than the house or the inheritance. It was a set of decisions that would test Liam in ways he couldn't yet understand. And with his mother standing there, helpless, Liam realized that his journey had just begun, and it was one he would have to face alone. The silence in the room was suffocating, and Liam knew that the next move was his. The weight of Walter's final wishes hung in the air, and in that moment, it became crystal clear. The hardest part of the journey wasn't just dealing with the inheritance, it was deciding what to do with the power Walter had left him. And the clock was ticking. Liam stood there, frozen, as his mother continued to hold Walter's hand, her face filled with a mixture of grief and disbelief. It felt as though time had stopped. Everything was spinning, the room growing smaller, suffocating with the weight of the decisions ahead. His mother's soft sobs filled the silence, but they didn't ease the turmoil inside him. For the first time in his life, Liam felt utterly alone, despite standing in a room with the woman who had raised him. There was so much she didn't know, so much he hadn't told her. But there was something else. Something pressing. Something that couldn't wait. As his mother leaned down, whispering softly to Walter, Liam turned away, his gaze falling on the envelope again. He had to do something, anything to push through the thick fog of uncertainty that clouded his mind. But the more he thought about the tasks Walter had left for him, the more he realized that there was something crucial missing from the picture. Walter's will had been cryptic, but now that his mother was here, a new sense of urgency struck Liam. Something was off. His pulse quickened as a sudden thought pierced through the fog. What if Walter had left something important out? Something that didn't show up in the will. Something hidden beneath the surface, just like all those years of Walter's silence. Liam's stomach twisted with the thought. Was it possible? Could Walter have been hiding something from him, something deeper than the legacy and the inheritance? He couldn't shake the feeling that this entire situation wasn't what it seemed. Walter had promised him answers, but the more he thought about it, the more Liam wondered if those answers would lead to a darker truth. He took a deep breath and grabbed the envelope again, his hands trembling as he opened it one more time, rifling through the papers in search of something he might have missed. His eyes skimmed over the words, now feeling too familiar, too cryptic, but there was nothing new. The tasks. The inheritance. The burden. But then, something caught his eye, a small, folded corner of the envelope that had gone unnoticed before. His heart skipped a beat. It was a separate slip of paper, hidden in the folds. He pulled it out carefully, not sure what to expect, his fingers shaking. The note inside was brief, written hastily, and unmistakably in Walter's handwriting. Liam, you're not alone. Your father left more than you know. The truth about him, about me, and about everything we've kept from you is hidden in the old study. It's not what you think. Go there, and you'll find the key to it all. But beware, someone is watching. Don't trust everyone around you. Not everyone has your best interests at heart. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. The words burned into his mind, the reality of what they meant settling over him like a storm cloud. Someone is watching. Who? And why hadn't Walter ever mentioned the old study before? What was it that he needed to uncover, something that was clearly dangerous and hidden away for so long? The weight of the note settled heavily in Liam's hands, and a cold wave of dread washed over him. He had been so focused on the inheritance, on the tasks, on the future that Walter had laid out for him, that he hadn't even considered the possibility that there were other forces at play, forces he couldn't even begin to understand. Liam felt a sharp pang of betrayal. How much had Walter really known? How much had he hidden from him, even in his final moments? The idea that someone was watching him, someone who might not have his best interests at heart, sent a chill down his spine. Who could it be? His mother? The lawyer? Or someone from Walter's past that Liam had never met? His mother's voice broke through his thoughts. She was standing behind him now, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "Liam, you look pale. What's wrong?" Liam quickly stuffed the note back into the envelope, his heart still racing. "Nothing," he said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. I need to be alone for a minute." Her face softened, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. She clearly wanted to help, but he couldn't bring himself to explain it all to her, not yet. The truth was, he didn't even know how to explain it to himself. What was happening? What had Walter been hiding? "I'll be right here if you need me," his mother said, her voice full of love and worry. But Liam was already turning away, his mind too occupied with the mystery to listen to her fully. He needed to find that study. The truth was in there, he could feel it, the heavy weight of it pressing against his chest. Walter had hidden something, and now it was up to Liam to uncover it. But as the thought settled in his mind, another one followed, sharp and unsettling. If someone was watching him, if someone had been keeping track of his every move, how could he possibly trust anyone in the house? How could he trust his own mother? The lawyer? The stakes had just been raised, and Liam's instincts told him that whatever was hidden in the study was far more dangerous than he could imagine. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It wasn't about following through with Walter's will. No, the stakes were higher than that, much higher. He needed to go to the study. And fast. Without wasting another moment, Liam grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair and headed toward the door. His mother glanced up at him from across the room, but he didn't meet her eyes. He couldn't. There were too many questions, too many doubts. He had to trust himself now. He had to follow the trail, no matter where it led. As he stepped outside, the cool air hit him, sending a shiver down his spine. The house loomed behind him, dark and foreboding, but it was the study that called to him now. The study was where the truth lay. The study was where everything would come together, or fall apart. Liam walked toward the back of the house, his footsteps quick and purposeful. He had no idea what he would find inside the study, but he couldn't stop now. He had to find the key to everything. He had to know what Walter had hidden, what he hadn't been able to tell him in life. The closer he got to the study, the more the tension seemed to build. The air felt thicker, charged with something he couldn't name, something dark. He reached for the door, his hand trembling. With one final breath, he turned the handle and stepped inside. The study was cold and dark, a heavy layer of dust coating the furniture, the air stale with the scent of long-forgotten things. It looked as if it hadn't been touched in years. But there was something about the room that made Liam's skin crawl, a presence, perhaps, that lingered despite the emptiness. He scanned the room, his eyes drawn to a large wooden desk at the far side. The drawers were locked, but his instincts told him that whatever he needed to find was there, buried somewhere within those drawers. He approached cautiously, his hand hovering over the desk, and with a deep breath, he pulled at the first drawer. It opened with a creak, revealing only yellowing papers and old books. Nothing important, or so it seemed. But as he shuffled through the contents, something else caught his eye. A small, worn notebook. The cover was plain, the edges frayed, but there was something about it that made Liam's heart skip a beat. He opened it slowly, his breath held in suspense, unsure of what he would find. The pages were filled with scrawled handwriting, Walter's handwriting, and the first words that jumped out at him stopped him cold. Liam, it's time to face the truth about your father. You've always been kept in the dark, but the darkness is ready to reveal itself now. Liam's hand shook as he turned the page. The truth was coming, and he wasn't ready for it. But he had no choice now. There was no turning back. Liam's pulse hammered in his ears as he turned slowly toward the dark corner of the basement. The shadow shifted, and a figure stepped into the dim light. His breath hitched as he recognized the person standing there, someone he never expected to see. It was his mother. Her face was a mask of calm, but there was something cold in her eyes, something Liam had never noticed before. She stepped forward, her movements slow but deliberate. "I told you to stay away from this, Liam," she said, her voice low, almost distant. "But you never listen, do you?" Liam's mind raced as the pieces fell into place. His mother had always been the comforting presence, the one who kept everything together, the one who had supported him through all the uncertainty of the last few months. But now, standing before him in the shadows of the basement, he realized that everything had been a lie. She knew more than she had ever let on. You knew?" Liam's voice was barely a whisper, a mix of confusion and anger. His mother nodded slowly, her expression unchanged. "I knew you would find out eventually. Walter was never going to tell you the truth, so I had to make sure you were kept safe from it." "Safe from what?" Liam's mind was spinning, his fingers still clutching the box. "What's in the box? What's all this really about? Who are you protecting me from?" She took a step closer, and Liam could feel the tension in the air, thickening with every word. "It's not just about Walter's legacy or the inheritance. It's about what he was hiding from everyone. From you, from me. And now it's your turn to carry that burden." Liam shook his head. "I don't understand. If you knew this all along, why did you let me believe I was just following some simple will, some set of tasks? Why didn't you tell me?" His mother's gaze softened for a moment, but there was no warmth in it. "Because I couldn't, Liam. If I had told you the truth, it would have destroyed everything. Your father, Walter, they were part of something much darker. And now that you're here, it's too late to turn back." The weight of her words hit him like a punch to the stomach. The pieces were falling into place, but each one was more devastating than the last. His mother had known about Walter's secrets, about his father's involvement in something sinister, and she had kept it from him all these years. Liam thought of all the times she had comforted him, reassured him that everything was going to be okay, when in reality, she had been keeping him in the dark. Liam took a step back, the box still in his hands, suddenly feeling its weight as though it had been made of lead. "You were part of this too, weren't you?" She didn't answer immediately, but the look in her eyes was all he needed to know. She had been part of the secret, part of the conspiracy to keep him away from the truth. But why? Why had she done this? "You don't understand, Liam," his mother said, her voice quivering for the first time. "I had to protect you. This isn't something you're ready for. It's not something anyone should have to face. What Walter and your father were involved in, what they were trying to stop, it's far bigger than all of us." Liam's grip tightened on the box as he finally understood the full extent of the danger. What were they trying to stop? His voice was almost pleading now, desperate for answers. His mother's eyes flickered toward the box in his hands, and for the first time, Liam saw a hint of fear in her eyes. She didn't want him to open it, didn't want him to uncover whatever was inside. And that only made him more certain that this was it, the moment where everything would change. "Liam," she said, her voice trembling now, "there are forces at play here that you can't even begin to understand. I did what I had to do to keep you safe. You don't know what's inside that box. If you open it, everything will change. Everything you know, everything you thought you understood about your family, about me, will be shattered. There's no going back." But it was too late. Liam had already made up his mind. With trembling hands, he opened the box, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, there was an old, faded photograph, a family portrait, but not one Liam had ever seen before. There were his parents, younger, smiling, but the man standing next to them was unfamiliar, someone Liam had never known. His father's face was hard to read, but the stranger's expression was filled with an eerie calm, almost a knowing smile. Liam's eyes darted from the photo to his mother. "Who is this man? Who is he?" His mother's face went pale. "That's your real father, Liam. The words hit him like a tidal wave, knocking the breath out of him. His real father? The man he had thought was his father, the one who had raised him, loved him, wasn't his biological father? The man in the photo had to be the one Walter and his mother had been protecting him from. But why? What had happened all those years ago? His mind was spinning, the shock of the revelation crashing over him in waves. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. His entire life had just been turned upside down. There's more, his mother continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The man in the photo, he was involved in something that's still alive today. Something dangerous. And now that you've opened that box, you're part of it too. Liam felt the ground beneath him shift, his reality fracturing as the truth unfolded before him. His biological father, the stranger in the photograph, had been part of something that had been hidden for so long, and now it was reaching out to him. The forces his mother had been protecting him from were closer than ever, and Liam had unknowingly walked right into their path. What do I do now? Liam's voice cracked with disbelief. His mother stepped forward, her hands trembling as she placed them on his shoulders. You have to make a choice, Liam. You can't undo what's been done. You can't go back. But you can decide how it ends. You can choose whether to let the past destroy you, or to fight back. Liam's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest as the full weight of his choices settled over him. The past, the truth, and the dangers it carried were now his to face. There was no going back. Whatever Walter and his mother had hidden from him had been exposed, and Liam now had to decide whether to walk away, to leave it all behind, or to dive deeper into a world of secrets and lies, where the consequences could be more than he was ready to handle. But just as he was about to speak, the basement door slammed open with a force that shook the entire room. A figure stepped into the light, someone Liam didn't recognize at first, but then, as the face came into focus, his blood ran cold. It was the man from the photograph. His biological father. And he wasn't here to explain. He was here to finish what had been started long ago. Liam's entire world seemed to crumble around him as the truth came crashing down. The real battle was just beginning, and this man, his father, was at the center of it all. Liam's breath caught in his throat as the man stepped into the dim light, his tall, imposing figure blocking the doorway. It took a moment for Liam's mind to process who it was. His biological father, the man from the photograph. The stranger who had been hidden from him his whole life. The figure didn't say a word at first. His eyes locked on Liam, intense and unreadable. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he took a step forward, his presence filling the space, making it feel smaller, tighter. Liam's mind raced. He thought he was prepared for this moment. He had been bracing himself for the truth for months. But this was something else. This was the culmination of everything he'd learned about his family, the lies, the secrecy, the danger. Liam began, but his voice faltered. You're my father? The man nodded, his expression unreadable. I am. But I'm not the father you thought you had. Liam felt as though the floor beneath him was slipping away, and for a moment, he couldn't find his footing. His life, everything he'd known, had just been turned upside down in an instant. All this time, he had been raised by someone who wasn't his real father. And now this stranger, this man he didn't know, was standing before him, holding the key to everything that had been kept hidden. Why didn't you tell me? Liam's voice shook with emotion. Why did you leave me in the dark all these years? The man let out a long sigh, his eyes filled with something like regret, but also a hard, unyielding determination. Because the truth was dangerous, Liam. It still is. He took another step forward. There are people, organizations, that will stop at nothing to control what your family has. The power we hold. The knowledge. You don't understand yet, but they'll do whatever it takes to get to you. Liam was reeling, but his curiosity, mixed with a deep need for understanding, kept him grounded. What do you mean by power? What's this about my family? Your family wasn't just ordinary, his father said, his voice low and steady. Your grandfather and I were part of something big, something secret. The knowledge we had, what we'd uncovered, it had the potential to change everything. But it also made us enemies. Dangerous enemies. Liam felt a chill run down his spine. What did you uncover? His father's gaze hardened. I can't tell you everything, not yet. But what I can tell you is that your family has always been at the center of a battle. A battle that's been going on for generations. A fight for control, for access to something that could give unimaginable power. Liam struggled to process the magnitude of what his father was saying. His entire life had been a lie. Or at least, a carefully constructed version of it. His family wasn't just a regular family, it was part of something much larger, something far more dangerous. So, Walter, Liam began, he knew all of this. His father nodded, a grim expression on his face. He did. But he made a choice. He chose to protect you. And that meant keeping you out of the truth. He didn't want you to be part of this war. But it was inevitable. It's in your blood, Liam. The knowledge, the power, it's in you. Liam's mind was racing. Everything he had learned about his family, about Walter, about his mother, it was all connected. But now the stakes had been raised to a terrifying new level. He was in the middle of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. And the people who had been following him, who had killed Walter, weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. Why come to me now? Liam asked, his voice steady despite the whirlwind inside him. Why reveal all this to me? His father's eyes softened, just for a moment. Because they're coming for you, Liam. You've already found the first piece of the puzzle. The truth. And now you're marked. They'll stop at nothing to make sure you don't uncover any more of it. I wanted to protect you from that, but it's too late. You're already part of this now. And I'll be damned if I let them take you. Liam's mind spun with all the revelations. He had been living a lie, yes, but now he was part of something far darker, something far more dangerous. Walter's death, his mother's secrecy, the strange box, it had all led to this moment. His father stepped closer, his eyes scanning the room. I didn't want this life for you, Liam. But now that you've opened that box, there's no going back. You have to choose now, whether you want to fight for what's yours or walk away and leave it all behind. The words hung in the air between them. Fight or walk away. It seemed like such an impossible choice, one Liam didn't feel prepared to make. But deep down, something inside him clicked. He couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when he was so close to understanding the full picture. I'm not running, Liam said, his voice firm. I want to know the truth. I want to finish what Walter started. Whatever this battle is, whatever this fight is, I'm in. I'm not afraid of it. His father's lips curled into a grim smile. That's the spirit. But you'll need more than just courage, Liam. You'll need allies. You'll need to be ready to fight back, because they won't stop. They'll keep coming for you until they get what they want. Liam felt a surge of resolve wash over him. He was no longer the same person he had been when he first entered this house, when he had first opened that box. The lies, the secrets, the danger, it was all part of his inheritance now. It was his birthright, whether he liked it or not. But he was done being in the dark. He was done hiding. I'll fight, he said, his voice steady now, filled with determination. I'll finish this. I'll protect what's mine. His father studied him for a long moment, and then nodded. Good. But remember, Liam, this won't be easy. There's much more you don't know. And the truth, once you see it all, will change everything. As his father turned and walked toward the basement door, Liam's heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear, the battle had just begun. And this time, Liam wasn't running from the truth. He was embracing it. He would fight for it, for his family's legacy, and for the answers that had eluded him for so long. As the door creaked closed behind him, Liam looked down at the photograph again, feeling the weight of his decision. This was only the beginning. What lay ahead would be dangerous, but he was ready. For the first time in his life, Liam felt like he truly knew who he was.